Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. I've been doing a series of webinars during the pandemic, and we've now come up on 1 year that I have been off the road. I have not been on an airplane for a year. It's amazing, and I'm loving it, actually. But we're going to continue with the webinars. We have webinars through the whole month of March, and we're booking April, so don't worry. I'm going to find a way to keep this going, even when we do start to return to some kind of normal. Do remember that this is week 6 of the 6-week contest. If you have not gone and checked that you're on the list and that you've entered all 5 weeks for the grand prize drawing on Friday, please go back and do so. I do also want to, I think it's kind of interesting that we're having these conversations this week. And I had a webinar with Martha Cook yesterday that one of my dear friends, Susan Harris, passed this week. She was an amazing artist and a very good friend. And even though I hadn't talked to her that much in the past several years, you know, she has a really soft spot in my heart. And she illustrated Joyce's books. And I was actually thinking maybe I can do some kind of a Zoom thing for her with, I'll talk to Peggy Brown and see if we can organize something, because a nice tribute to Sue. She's just was an amazing person, really gentle and kind-hearted, and we'll miss her dearly. And it's interesting tonight that what we are talking about is end-of-life decisions. So that's why I felt it was a little bit appropriate to speak of Sue and Joyce. You know, this is a topic that a lot of people find awkward and uncomfortable, but it's an important conversation. This week's been kind of an interesting week. We had barn fires on Monday and how to prevent them, really, what to do. And now we're talking end of life. So I'll leave it there. Joyce, if you just do a brief intro, and then we can get into our topic tonight.
Thank you, Wendy. And yes, a tribute to Sue Harris as an amazing, her contributions to the horse world were truly amazing in us understanding their anatomy, bringing it down to a level at which people who don't study anatomy as a science can understand, and movement. She truly was amazing. And
she was the first person to do the painted horse.
Yes.
She did that many years ago. It's become a very popular thing for a lot of people to do, but Sue was really the first one to do that. And I just went and looked back that it was in 2006 when we had the Eye for a Horse workshop with Sue and her mom, where she taught a bunch of students how to draw more, how to be better artists. And I have those pictures. And you came to dinner that night. We had the dinner at Pam's.
So,
yeah, she was doing that for a long time. So anyway, I'll see if I'll talk to Peggy and see maybe we can put something together.
Great. So I've been a holistic veterinarian since 1990 here in Virginia. And one of the topics that all of us who really care about our horses end up having to face one way or another. And sometimes it's dramatic in that they decide they're going to colic and turn up their toes and die instantaneously. And other times it's a long and lingering process. And I think it's a really good, when Wendy asked me to do this topic, I thought that this is just a super topic, because we don't talk enough about it, and we don't, as a society, we don't really deal with death very well. And yet it's the one thing other than taxes that we are guaranteed. And it's the one thing that our animals are guaranteed, and they don't have to pay taxes. So in their lives, this is the only thing probably that's an absolute guarantee. So many of us have rescued our horses from really tough situations. Others of us have raised them from babies and had them their whole lives. And others of us have joined partnerships with our horses, partway through their lives. And yet we end up keeping them until the end. And so it's just a really super topic to start thinking about and making more part of the conversation, because horses have feelings, animals have feelings, and truthfully, they're better about the dying process for the most part than we are. And they're much more accepting of it. And not every single animal, but many of them are like, they're okay with it. It's time. And maybe I can start this off with one of the more incredible experiences of my life. This was many years ago. I think I was actually writing my saddle fitting book. And I was stuck at home, and my mother's old horse at that point, he was 36, 37, who quite knows, but draft horse, Appaloosa cross. And I always knew if this horse didn't eat, that was probably his last day, because he lived to eat. He even ran away one day with a bad hock injury because I let him loose on the lawn, and he hobbled off on 3 legs so that he could go eat, and had no intention of sticking around. So I went down to feed down to the lower field, and he didn't eat his breakfast. And I thought, this is not a good sign. So the lower field is far away from the house. So I brought him up to the barn paddock, and I have a little porch out in front. And there was nobody here but me. And so I sat on my porch, and I brought his best buddy up with him. And the two of them hung out in the pasture, and he was sort of a little bit colicky, but not really colicky. And I did go, and because I'm a holistic vet, I didn't have much in the way of drugs. I did borrow a little bit of Banamine from one of my neighbors to give him a little pain relief, but he clearly was not totally comfortable. And so I'd go down and check on him, and I'd come up and sit on my porch and write and just hang out kind of in his presence. And about mid-afternoon, I got this feeling that I should go down and bring all of his friends up. So I brought the other 3 horses that were in the pasture up the hill and put them in the paddock with him. And he was not totally comfortable, so he'd kind of go to lie down. And there was one of my horses that decided that was not okay, so she kept chasing him. So I said, okay, you 3, you go out into the next field next door so you don't bother him. And I left him and his buddy, horse's name was Ilario. So I left Ilario and his buddy in the paddock. And along about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I got this really strong, clear message from him that he needed help. And I'm not a very capable animal communicator, but this was as clear as me talking to you right now. I need help. So the only kind of help that I really, as a veterinarian, knew what to do, because it was very clear to me that he's 37. He's not a savable horse in the sense, and he's also not in a lot of pain, just a little uncomfortable. But I got the strong sense that he was winding down. So I had my euthanasia solution, and I go out to the paddock to give him some help, the only way that I thought I knew how. And so it's just me and him. And I thought, well, I can get one of my neighbors if I need to. So I go up to him, and his buddy walks between me and him and says, this is not the help he needs. So I put my syringes back in my pocket, and I thought, okay, I don't know what this means, but this is a loud, clear message. And within 3 or 4 minutes, he laid down and died. And the help I gave him was to keep his head from hitting the ground, and lowered him gently. His body went down, but his head went gently down because I was holding on to him. And he was dead. That was it. And it was an incredibly powerful experience. He got to do it on his own terms, which is not something that we always get to have the choice, because horses are huge animals. We can have an old dog, even an 80-pound dog. You can get your friend to help you carry them outside. You can turn them over to keep them from getting bed sores. You can lift their heads up and feed them if you need to. There's lots of things that you can do. But when you have a 1,000, or in this case, probably 1,300-pound horse, there's very little that you can do except be there with them and keep them and you safe. So the problem is that he went very quietly. He basically laid down and died, and I held him. And then after I said my goodbyes, I left his friend in there with him. And that's one of the things that's probably one of the more important aspects is we don't need to however the death happens, we don't need to hide it from their friends. We don't need to hide it from their family. We need to let them come out and say goodbye to the body, if it is at all possible.
Be right back.
And so they need to spend their time, and I let the other horses come in and say their goodbyes, the other 3 that I had banned to the other field. And then I left him and his best friend there until I told him, I said, tell me when you're done. And about 2 or 3 hours later, he came over to the gate and was standing there and hanging out. And it was time for him to go back. He had finished. And so in that whole process, I was very safe and he was very safe. His mild discomfort during the day didn't put anybody at danger. But when you have a horse that is thrashing around with a severe colic, they are a danger not only to themselves, but to you, because you can't get in there and hold them and be with them. You can't safely often do very much other than to give them some more pain relieving drugs or to have the veterinarian involved. But we still can recognize when they need that help, that syringe that I had in my hand that allows them to make a transition in a beautiful way, if possible. And if we know the end of life is coming, if they're getting old and they're you can tell that they're going downhill and it's a slow process, sometimes, many times, you walk out to the barn one morning and you know in your heart, and it's feeling it in your heart that you know the time is right. Until you feel it, it isn't right. When it's right, that's when our ability to euthanize is so important, because they can't lie in bed for a week and have us take care of them while they go through a natural dying process. Most of the time they can't. Occasionally they can, but very, very rarely. And when you know it in your heart, then it's okay, and it allows for the completion of life. And everybody, even though it's painful, because we're humans and we want that furry body, we want to hold on to them, we want to touch them and see them. Their spirit's still around, but it's hard for us to feel that the same kind of way. The spirit's there for sure, but the body's gone. And so when it comes time to let them go and they say it's okay, like one horse that I knew, on the day that he was ready to go, this was 25 years ago, they got up in the morning and walked out, and there he was standing under the apple tree that he was supposed to be buried under. and it was on the side of the barn that he never really went to. It was in the paddock, but it wasn't his hangout spot. And we knew I think he had a heart thing. I can't remember what his issue was, but we knew that he was going downhill. And that morning, there he is under his apple tree. It's like, okay, got the message. He's ready. It's time. And so another horse that I remember did have a congestive heart failure used to hang out right on the street corner where everybody in the neighborhood could see her. And she had specifically told the animal communicator she wanted to go on her own terms. And with heart failure, that's quite reasonable, because usually the end is quite quick. It's not like a colic that can be dangerous. But she's kind of skinny and kind of old, and she liked it on top of the hill where everybody could see her and think that she was perhaps not being cared for as well as she could. And yet, in fact, she was being cared for exactly how she wanted it. And one day, her owner went down to the barn after she'd been away for the afternoon. She went down to the barn, and there she was, curled up, stone cold dead. Very peaceful, no sign of struggle. She did it on her own terms. Those are the beautiful cases. Those are the ones we all pray for. The reality is often very different. And a lot of times, one of the things that fails on us with our equine friends is the gut. And that can be a very painful ending. And it's time for us to step in and say, this is enough. And many times, again, we get that feeling in our heart. It's like, okay, we can't do any more. My 37-year-old horse, my mother's 37-year-old horse, it was not, even if he had a colic, he was not a candidate for surgery. You would never want to put a horse through that at that age. The chances of him actually living, even for a simple colic surgery, are negligible. And so it would have been totally the right thing to let him go. But he can also, we can have that in a 7-year-old horse that is got a seriously damaged gut and is in serious pain. And surgery is not always the perfect option. Financially, it's a huge, huge commitment that not all of us can make. It is a huge recovery commitment. And depending on the level of gut damage, when God made horses, he, she, it, whatever goofed, because the horse's gut has a lot of problems.
I have to deal with my cat again. Keep going.
And so that is sometimes our very painful ending. And it's time, if there's enough gut damage, that surgery is likely to have a very or potentially bad outcome. You have to kind of weigh the risk to the horse of having a recovery in a normal life after you put him through this surgery versus the benefit. And if the risk, because of the amount of dead gut, is too huge, then why not let them go when they can be at home? You haven't hauled them off to the hospital. You haven't put them through a painful surgery and 2 or 3 days worth of really rough recovery, only to say, I can't, the horse is just not going to make it. So there are many, many things. Horses are not necessarily our best patients when it comes to, say, a broken leg. We can lay up in bed. If the doctor says you're going to be in this traction unit for 6 weeks, we may cuss and swear and moan and complain and drive our spouses nuts while we're recovering, but we can be stuck in that bed for 6 weeks, basically not really moving. Now, nowadays, they don't do as much of that kind of dramatic stuff, but we can put our bodies into a cast, even our back, we can put it into a cast. We can restrict our movement. There are horses that you absolutely you can tie them in a corner of a stall for 3 months and they will be happy eating hay while their leg heals. There are other horses that you can't confine for 48 hours before they will break the rest of their leg because they just can't. And so we have to make some of these really, really tough decisions sometimes for them. And they could be young and vital and yet have something that's irreparable. And those are some of the toughest cases because we know they're strong. And yet we also know the reality is that when this horse decides to go ballistic in the stall and that leg falls apart, that it's going to be 10 times worse than what we're looking at right now with the horse having just injured the leg. And so,
And
go
I
ahead.
think that, you know, as I listen to you and people are really appreciating you sharing your story um, with Ilario, I've forgotten about him. That I remember him when you talked about him. Um, there, you know, it's so hard because there's so many things that go into that decision. It's whether it's your financial situation, your boarding situation, the horse's temperament, the degree of injury. It you know, there's a lot of different factors that have to go in, and I don't know that anyone can tell anyone when it is the time, because each person has to evaluate those things for themselves. And I think that you're talking about, we know it in our heart what the right decision is. It may not be an easy decision, but if we're really honest with ourselves, we do know, because we know the horse. Now I have to let the cat out, so I'll be right back.
Yes, and so that is so much the important thing, and sometimes it's really hard in the moment, especially if the moment is dramatic. It's hard to feel what's the right decision. And so you're having to make these much faster decisions. It's so much easier if you have a week or a couple of months to know that your old horse is deteriorating and it's time to be saying goodbye. And lots of times you're coming, you're coming to the end, and you can be, say they have really bad laminitis and they haven't been able to have anything, any carrots or any, major treats or any sweet feed or anything that might be their favorite treat. And it's coming to the end. The foot's coming through the bottom of the sole, and it's just not fair anymore. And you're starting to get the messages that your horse is done. Let them have a beautiful last day. Have a celebration. Let them eat all the carrots in the world that they want to, whether it's or candy canes or whatever, because you can do this entire ceremony, and it can be about things that are important to you as far as part of the ceremony and things that are important to them. And the things that might be important to you in a ceremony, might be sitting quietly and praying with them. The things that might be important to them is half a big bag of carrots. And that makes it, you can say a goodbye. But when you're standing out in the field and the leg is kind of dangling by some threads and it's not a very good situation, you don't have time for those. You can certainly shovel carrots into them if they are in enough shock and pain is controlled enough that you can actually do that. They may or may not want to. They may be already leaving their body. And one of the things that makes the difference between life and death is the spirit leaves the body. And some of these really traumatic situations, you can almost look at the horses and tell, like, you see their eyes and they're already checking out. It's like, there is no way I can deal with this, fractured femur, or this, colic and half of the gut is dead.
Yeah. So someone has made a comment that there's the fear of playing God under pressure being very difficult. And, I actually think that that's, if we're really honest with ourselves, then we're not playing God. We're really being in touch with the situation at hand. And I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about Fanny
Yes.
as a traumatic
Mhm.
experience.
Yes.
So I had a mare named Fanny, and she was an older mare, and she had a club foot, and the farrier had been trimming the club foot, but forgot about the fact that she had a calcified tendon. So the foot was responding, but the leg couldn't. And so she was in our hill field, and she came down the hill field, and basically she went ass over tea kettle and concussed herself. And she did that twice. And so we treated her for the concussion, and then she came down with EPM, and we treated her for EPM. And the day Joyce cleared her to go back to work, that morning, that next morning she had bacterial enteritis. And so I got to the barn. Joyce called, said, get to the barn, and I got to the barn, and we knew something was very wrong. We didn't know what it was yet. And Joyce, I don't know if I don't have a lot of details on that morning.
So she was definitely, she had a bit of a fever, but she also had gut pain, but not the kind of gut pain that you would really truly associate with colic. And my feeling was more of an enteritis than so we actually called in one of the local veterinarians who had equipment to do rectals and do stuff that I don't normally do and am not good at. And we both agreed that it was an enteritis. So, and that she needed to be at the hospital.
So I loaded her up in my trailer, which was a 4-horse trailer with living quarters, and I had a stud stall in the front. So I had a full wall, slant wall. And I put her in that front stall, and I went down the road by myself to go to the vet clinic. And Joyce said to just stop and check on her. And so when I got to an intersection, which was, what is that, about 6 miles from the house?
Yeah.
I stopped at the intersection, and I got out, and I opened the stall door, and she slid onto the ground on the road because she came right underneath the petition. And so here I was by myself with a 1,500-pound 16-2 hand Holstein mare dying on the side of the road. And it's very emotional even now. But it was an amazing thing because so many people came by that intersection that could help, that weren't just bystanders, but people that knew me and people that could help. And Joyce had just started out to go to work. And somehow we got a hold of you. You hadn't left yet. And I had a signal. And so you came up, and the first thing you did was you gave me Rescue Remedy. And thank God for that, because it was the only thing that got me from absolute hysteria to at least being present. And we had to take ropes and get her off the road because she was in the road. And in fact, we couldn't even put her there now because there's a fence where we got her off the side of the road, and she died right there on the side of the road. And Joyce knew she was dying and just said, be with her, which I was. And I can't go past that intersection without thinking. I usually don't get upset because I went past it today, but it's been a long time. And someone went and got her and brought her home to the farm, and we buried her on the top of the hill. But the thing that was so fascinating, which I've done many times when I've had an animal die, is I've talked to an animal communicator, and I called a good friend and I explained the situation. And so she went to talk to Fanny, and the first thing Fanny said, so what's happening with your landlord? In total, like what? You're talking about my landlord? And she knew that I had a problem, which I did. I had a problem with my landlord. I had taken down some trees that were causing the house to be so dark that it was molding. The landlord was really upset. I lost my deposit because of it. And that was what my horse was concerned about. And what she said was, I've been thinking about this for a while. Remember that? She said, I've been thinking about this for a while. And, for us, it was horrific. And for Fanny, it was just her time.
It was her transition.
Yep. So we can't always set it up to be the way we want it. It's going to be
Right.
the way it is.
And it is what, this is not an equine thing, but when I had one of my old kitties that had gotten, he was ancient and he knew better than to be under cars because he was a car cat, but he went under a car and he got his leg broken. And one day I was out, and for whatever reason, I stopped at a park and took a walk instead of coming home. I never do that, especially if I have a sick animal. I took a walk in this park and I had a lovely walk in the park, and I came home and he had passed while I was there. I was not supposed to be there with him.
Yeah.
As Wendy has been not supposed to be there with a couple of hers. And it's like the universe helps us in the way, or I don't know, they help us. It is the way that it is, the way that life and death were destined to be. And it's not something we necessarily have control over. And
ever since Fanny, I have not been around for the other deaths. The cat, my mom, and Andy. So I think they all made a pact. They decided I couldn't handle this anymore. So
yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's okay. But it's sometimes harder on us because we either want to be there sometimes, or sometimes we can't because we do get too emotional. And sometimes the animal is ready to move on. It is time. And sometimes us humans, because we're not very good at this, and especially the animals that we're really close to, we don't want them to go, and they will try to stay for us, not for them. And they're ready, they're fine. It's like, it was a body, but I am my spirit. I am fine. I'm just going to be in a different situation. And if you allow yourself to connect after they've passed, you realize that you can connect. You can get messages. Some of those messages are loud and clear. Some of those messages are little signals that just let you know they're still around. It just depends on your connection with that animal. It depends on that animal and how they choose to connect to you. Sometimes you get you'll get a signal, you'll have a dream. I had a cat one time who, about 3 or 4 months after his last disappearance, he would disappear regularly. I had this most joyous dream that I'd ever had about him. And I know that was his goodbye. I don't know if it was a goodbye that I found a new home that I like better, or if that was a goodbye that I've just been eaten by a coyote, or that I just passed on because it was my time. But it was just this most joyous dream. And it was very clear to me that that was a message from him. And so if we allow ourselves to feel that connection once the body's gone, it also makes it a whole lot easier, because yes, it hurts, but in our hearts, which is what really counts, we know that their spirit is still with us, and that they are still looking out after us in their new form. My old Rosie dog, who was one of my really close connection dogs, and she retired and hung out for a year or so before she passed on. And one time I was in China, and I was walking into a temple, and I got this clear as day message from her, just about as clear as with that horse, that now she was free. She could actually travel with me again, because her old body hadn't allowed her to travel. And she had been my companion in the car and had been everywhere with me. But now in her spirit form, she was still with me and she could travel. So you find little ways. You may see a butterfly or a bird flying around that just hangs around. And it's like, this is a wild animal. Why is it, hanging around me? Well, maybe that's a little piece of the spirit just trying to connect with you.
So just we've had some very kind comments. One is that I believe those of us who are in the place of being able to help with animals who is ready to go when the owner is not equipped to do so has a huge gift to give the owner and support and honor the animal's passing. Absolutely, because it is not necessarily easy. And that there's a great book called Signs, The Secret Language of the Universe, that's all about listening to those signs. I hadn't heard about that book.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Yep. And somebody's really thrilled that a doctor is talking about this.
Well, those of us in the holistic world tend to connect much more. And in fact, in a lot of cases, especially in small animal practice, we do more end of life work than the average practitioner, because it's the older animals, it's the cancer animals, it's the chronic diseases that all come to us in practice. And so we get to see a lot of it, and you will see quite a few, well, you see many veterinarians who are very tuned into it. A good friend of mine, Ella Biddle, has this fabulous website called spiritsin-transition.org. All one word, spiritsin-transition.org. And she was really one of the pioneers of thinking about hospice and thinking about natural dying when possible. And natural dying is something that is being talked about a lot more now in human medicine, and natural ways of burying people and different ways of helping to create that transition with the physical body. But recognizing that animals actually have a desire, just as many people do, to die at home in peace with their humans around them. And like I said earlier, that's easier with the small animals to sort of have everybody gather around than it is with the horses. But we can recognize that there are horses and there are times and there are situations where that can happen if we allow it. And the animals can go in our arms quietly at home if we allow it. We have been taught by many, many people that, oh, they're suffering, we need to put them down now. That's very much about a common way of thinking. Well, the tumors are terrible, you should put her down now, right now. There's no hope. Well, that's true. There may be no hope, but also how many animals have you heard about walking around that the vet said, oh, they're going to be dead in 2 weeks or 2 months. And 2 years later, they're cruising around still because they decided they weren't quite ready to die. And so when things look really bad, it's important. A lot of times you go and you talk to your veterinarian comes out and looks at the horse and says, this is hopeless. But like the old guy that I had, yeah, it's maybe hopeless. And I could have put him down in the morning and said, this is, I recognize this is the end of your life. But he's not. It's hard to define suffering in this sort of a sense, because we have a perception sitting on the outside of what suffering is. But when you're sitting on the inside and you're around say, a human who's dying who can converse a little bit, they can still, th- they want to go through that process. They have things yet that they want to say, or goodbyes that they want to say. And the animals can do that as well. They don't necessarily tell you to, like my mother did to my brother, go fix the crack that's by the sink and tell me how to use the washing machine at 3 a.m. in the morning. You know, she had some things that she needed to tell us. But they do the same thing. Sometimes you can take them home. You can say to the vet, okay, you know, I would like to wait, and, you know, we'll revisit this tomorrow. My old, go ahead.
Sorry, it just brings up, there's a comment here and it kind of brings up the two different sides of it. One is the person wanting to wait, giving the horse the time to die in their own way. And I have another comment about that. And then this comment is that, you know, that, where is it? The vet talking, she says, I have had so many friends, clients who have called the vet to put a horse down. The vet comes out, says, let's try this, let's try that, and ends up putting such terrible emotional stress on the heart as the death becomes traumatic. And this is true in people. I mean, we have the right to make the decision. It's our right. And, you know, I can remember, this is a while ago now, where, you know, people would try everything to save their relative and not accept the fact that the relative is going to die. And in the end, everybody was bankrupt, emotionally, physically, huge depression issues, because we if we're not allowed the natural process of grieving, which is something that is natural. And if we bottle that up or don't go through that process, it's going to come out or not come out and go in another way. There's going to, you know, there's going to be an effect on our health.
Yes, and if you look at those of us humans that can speak English or language to each other, how many of us sitting here listening tonight or sitting around talking with your friends say to each other, it's going to be perfectly fine if I'm in a nursing home and in the hospital and hooked up to IVs and hooked up to machines, because I want to live every possible minute, no matter how that happens. There's probably a few people who are so worried about dying that they will say that that's what I want. I want you to do every machine under the sun to keep me on this planet. Most of my friends, we sit around the table and say, listen, if I start to get a little bit weird, just shove me out when it's 0 degrees and let me freeze to death. Or just, you know, make sure that I fall in the swimming pool, or, you know, just make sure that I do not go down that path, because that is not how I want to go. So that's us humans that can speak to each other and say, I do not want to end up as my father, mother, brother, you know, cousin, uncle, or whatever, in a nursing home hooked up to fluids, or in a hospital hooked up to fluids and hooked up to machines and everything else. So we are a spirit as well. And so if we take that to our animals who cannot say to us, I don't want all of those things done to me. I'm done. I'm ready. I'm happy. I've had a good life. Let me go. So we come in, and as veterinarians and doctors, the training is sort of do everything to keep you alive. And we now have fancy machines to do that for all species. More so for humans, but we've got plenty that we can do with the horses and the dogs and the cats. But what does that spirit want to do? The spirit is fine. It's ready to go. The body's worn out. We don't have to keep that body going because we can. And that's where you want to step back and say to the vet, I'll call you in 12 hours and we'll see. And then go sit with your horse, sit on the fence, sit on the ground and feel, listen, feel in your heart. Do we really need to do all of these interventions? Do we really need to do, X, Y, and Z and attempt to hang on when in reality, it doesn't look like that's feasible? There's, big, huge tumors growing rapidly and about to take over the heart or the gut or whatever. You have 12 hours. You have a little bit of time to sit with the animal, feel, connect, give them permission to leave, give yourself permission to grieve, give yourself permission to let them go. You do get animals who are like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to eat, come hell or high water. Those animals, yes, they probably do want to go to the hospital and have that extra surgery done. And that's okay. If you get that sense from them or talk to a communicator and they're like, yes, I'll do the surgery. I want to stay. I got things I still need to do. That's okay. But it's also okay to step back. My old cow did this to me. She got herself all hung up. I knew she was ancient. And she did not have good hips or pelvis or anything. And she went down one day, could not get up. And I said, okay, fine. It's good. You don't have to. I will call the vet because at this stage, I don't keep euthanasia solution anymore. And it would be hard for me. I was very, very close to that cow. And so I called the vet and they said, well, he'll be over at 2. And so I went out to just cancel my appointments and I went out and sat in the shed with her. She kept looking at me out of the corner of her eye and rolling her eyeball at me. And just I'd put a halter on her, but that didn't seem to help get her up. But this eyeball was like, I don't really want to die right now. And I'm like, yeah, but you can't stand up. And short of putting you in a sling. So long about 1 o'clock, she stuck her horn in the ground, pushed herself to her feet and looked at me and said, I am not ready to die. So I said, okay. And I picked up the phone and I called the vet's office. And I said, she just told me she's not ready to die and she's standing up. And they said, okay, call us back whenever you need something. So 2 years later, she finally died.
Yeah.
So you can get that sense. And I just kept, as I was sitting there, she just was telling me she wasn't ready. And yet I'm looking at her thinking the only way I know how to save her would be to put her in a sling. So she decided that she had to do something to show me she was perfectly capable. And she did.
And smart.
And it took her till 1 o'clock. It was almost 2 o'clock, but it wasn't 2 o'clock. So we can listen. And in my heart, I knew she didn't want to go, but I also knew I didn't have the tools to put her through just to build a sling to hold her up.
Yeah.
So it's all of these pieces that we have to weigh, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. But in many, many instances, you have 15 minutes, an hour, 2 days, 6 hours to just sit and say, what do I feel? What does this animal need or want? And what can I provide? And that might very well be the gift of euthanasia, because euthanasia is a gift. if they can't do it on their own. And many, many animals with severe musculoskeletal issues or fractures in the case of the horses, and fractures in the case of dogs. If it's too bad a fracture, the surgeries and the odds of healing some of them just aren't there. And so we have those few minutes though to sit and ask those questions and feel.
I did not know this, but somebody's put in the chat that there's a website for the International Association of Animal Hospice and Palliative Care.
Yes, there actually is. There is now a group, and there is sort of becoming a specialty. And many of these are alternative medicine veterinarians, but not all. There are some conventional veterinarians that are getting very interested in hospice care. And there are some mobile practitioners who are particularly in the horse world. We're used to people coming out to the barn, but not available in every area. But there are more and more mobile practices that are hospice based, and their goal is to go around and administer hospice care, which is, it's end of life care. It's making them comfortable while they come to terms and while they process through to the end. Because especially when it's going to take a month or two for the cancer or the in some kind of liver disease or something like that to bring them to the end, they need supportive care, they need pain care, they need fluids, they need something, but they're okay otherwise. And this is becoming much more popular. And many of the veterinary practices, certainly not all, but many veterinary practices now have a special room for euthanasia, a special procedure in the sense that, you know, having family members, having a living room type of setting. And also just being willing to provide hospice care, pain meds, whatever it is that's needed for that end of life, teaching people how to give fluids to support them. And at the other end, as you approach death, we have to look at the fluids idea a little bit, because fluids are
It's cat night.
Yes. Fluids are something, if we look at the natural dying process, very often we stop eating. And you can live for a month without food in many, many cases. Certainly several weeks without any problem. So food is the first thing that often goes away. And as humans, we're like, well, we want to feed them. And in the case of my mother's horse, and actually one of the cats I had, the same thing. I knew that if he didn't eat, he was near the end. And he took about 3 or 4 days to die, but he quit eating. That was his first. That was Gulliver when he was 21.
Yeah.
But he stopped eating. It's the drinking though. Once they stop drinking on their own, the temptation sometimes is to, well, it's time to give them fluids. But that's really, the fluids is the nearing the end stage part of the dying process. And when you stop taking in fluids, you cannot live for very much longer. You can live for several days, depending on how hydrated you are when you quit. But in those final days, in the natural dying process, fluids are not always indicated just to keep them comfortable, but pain meds can be. And so that's where the hospice veterinarians get good at figuring out when it's appropriate to stop with things like fluids, and recognizing the symptoms and signs. And the human hospice people are also really, really good at that.
Yeah, it's the International Association of Animal Hospice and Palliative Care. It's the IAAHCP.org. And somebody commented on how she does end of life care for horses, and part of the role is to help with body work and acupressure as comfort care and the herd, but more importantly, helping the guardian walk through the transition as prepared as possible, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. In other words, helping those that are there. So,
Yes. Yeah.
Joyce, this does a little bit of the nuts and bolts side of it. Horses are really large animals. And there's, if a horse dies inside of a barn, that's a huge deal. And not everybody has the luxury, as I have, to bury my animals on your property. So what are some of the challenges that people might face in terms of, once the animal passes, what do you do?
So that's a really, really good question. And that varies around the country. We are blessed out here to have land and have the legal ability to bury something as large as a horse on our property. In places like Florida, the water table is kind of in the basement, or you don't even have a basement, and you cannot bury an animal because it would probably float up to the surface. And yeah, that would be a bad deal. And so legally you cannot, you have to cremate. So there are cremation services that do horses. There actually is one in Northern Virginia, and there are ones scattered around the country. There is access sometimes to the cremation services. Many of the veterinarians will know about a local service in your area. And you can cremate and get your remains back and have your own ceremonies at home. Part of the issue, you can have the various rendering plants around the country will also, in many cases, pick up animals. That's part of their job. They collect dead animals from everywhere, and they get rendered down, and we won't even go to what might happen afterwards, but it is a very valid disposal method because we do have this large body. And if you're in an urban or heavily suburban area, you can't bury them in your backyard, and it is illegal. So it is a good idea, no matter where you are in the country and no matter how young your horses are, to just know what you have available. And you also, even in my area, you're not going out there with a shovel and digging a hole. So you need to know somebody with a backhoe and that has a piece of equipment that's big enough to dig a hole, because you've got to bury them well below the surface. We're blessed to have some people who are just the kindest people to come and dig the hole and carry the body out to the hole and do that in a way that honors them. You don't always have access to people like that, but you have to also recognize that it is at that point a body. The spirit that's so important to us is free, and that's still connected to us. And so when you're disposing of the physical body, it helps to think of it as, okay, this is the body, this is the remains. And it makes it a little bit easier when it goes off in a dump truck and doesn't seem very ceremonious, because you do your ceremonies before that happens. And once the horse is dead, spend a little time sitting with them, collect some mane, tail hair. There's some really cool places that will make belts and sculptures and all kinds of stuff out of your horse's mane and tail hair. But spend a little bit of that time and say your goodbyes, just like you have allowed the fellow horses from the pasture or the farm to say their goodbyes. You say your goodbyes. and then cover them up with a blanket and work on your disposal. But it does pay to find out what your laws are in your area and know that and keep that. We always have kept a little note on the door with all of our other phone numbers, dead animal burial, because it may happen when we're out of town and somebody needs to know what that procedure might be and who to call.
Yeah, and somebody was saying in Pennsylvania, she's made a plan for her 26-year-old. And it's making a plan ahead of time is going to save you a lot of stress. So it's just a good idea, kind of like, a lot of these webinars are about being proactive so that when the time comes, it's just a process that you walk through and you don't have nearly the stress that you would have without a plan.
Yeah, because it's like, and you can even have, many of us don't want to watch our animal being, say, put on the back of a truck. But you go inside, you know who to call, you said your goodbyes, you call the people up, they come, they do their job. It's all taken care of. And at that point, it can be mechanical and you go off and do the things you need to do for you. If you're scrambling to find somebody and you have no clue if they're really qualified, you're going to be worried the whole time that it's not going to be good.
Add to the drama.
In some cases, and this is much less common than it used to be, fox hunting horses were often fed to the hounds. And for a fox hunting horse, that was always considered a very honorable end to the body. And it's a way to dispose of this body again. But that has become much less socially acceptable. And even in my area, which is a heavy fox hunting area, it's now rarely done. But it's a large body to find a new home for.
Well, Joyce, I want to thank you so much for this discussion. Everybody's really appreciated it. And, I think it is something that we really do need to think about so that it can be as peaceful and as joyous as possible. And to sit with our grief, which is totally okay. I think that so many people are afraid of that kind of grief, but it is it's as natural as breathing. And if we block that grief, we are gonna cause other problems because it's part of what being human.
Yes, and part of being human is wanting that fuzzy body.
Yeah.
And being able to hug it and hold it. But we can let that fuzzy body go and still connect with the spirit of our animals.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Bit of a somber discussion, but an important one. And thank you, Joyce, for sharing your story. That was really stories, really very kind of you. And we'll see you all on Friday. Friday, we're going to have a happy experience because somebody's going to win a full set of Surefoot pads. So we'll put a smile on somebody's face on Friday and we'll talk about Surefoot. So tune in 1 o'clock and we'll have the drawing at the end of the show. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to have Laura Plunkett coming on and we're going to talk about from her perspective, some of the things you can do to be in support of your animals. If the time has come near. So looking forward to that one. Yep. And so we'll see you all on Friday. Thank you so much again. Thank you, Joyce. And I'm sure we'll have you back for another topic. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks. And thanks for coming up with what I think is a really important topic for us to get out in the open.
Yep. All right, everybody have a great night and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.